This is the Elevate Construction Podcast, delivering remarkable content for workers, leaders, and companies in construction wanting to take their next step. Get ready to step out of your comfort zone with Jason Schroeder as he encourages you to do better, live a remarkable life, and expect more. Let's go.
Welcome to the Elevate Construction Podcast, where we help you become the best version of you. My name is Jason Schroeder, and today's podcast is about the courage to be disliked. So why would you want to listen to that today? Do you put too much stock in others? Are you a little bit insecure because of the way you've been treated? Do you get your feeling of importance from other people? Do you get embarrassed because of the way you think you'll be perceived? Do you need to be liked in order to be whole, in order to be happy, and you don't want to be trapped by that anymore? Well, if any of these things resonate with you even a little bit, then you're going to want to listen today. The courage to be disliked is absolutely critical and crucial technique that you can use in construction to be a better manager, a better leader, and a better all-around team player. So here's a quote for you. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And that quote is from Theodore Roosevelt. I absolutely love that quote. And I think we have to remember that it is our job to dare greatly. In fact, Brene Brown wrote a fantastic book about that called Dare Greatly or Daring Greatly. And that's really our job. That's the focus. We have to move forward in life with our emotions, with our tasks, with everything that we're supposed to do in a confident manner without worrying what the critic says. But so many of us, and I'm going to put myself in that boat because I'm very much like this, so many of us have put our stock, our feeling of self-importance, our worthiness, everything, our impression of ourselves, our vision of ourselves, our happiness, everything in the hands of other people. And we can't do that if we're going to go out there and do the right thing. And so I just want to mention really quickly that one time I was overseeing a project as a director. And I've been able to do that for multiple projects. And the project team, when I would come there, didn't really like it when I chimed in. And, there's just different personalities. It's all good. They're doing a fantastic job. But the project team, their personalities really didn't get along with me. When I would leave, sometimes they would say, I don't know why Jason comes around. I don't know why he's checking in on things. We don't need him. I would prefer that our director is, at a distance. And, every now and then this happens. And I think it happens with certain teams. And it really bothered me because I'm here to help people, to love people, to help them be more successful and to bring out the best in others and to strive for excellence. And sometimes people don't like that. In fact, there was this one person who said, I don't want that kind of influence. I just want to follow the rules by the book that I'm given by the company. I want to do my job day in and day out. I don't want to have to talk to a lot of people. I don't like this teaming stuff. I don't want to be on this project. And that hurt my feelings. And when I read this book, The Courage to be Disliked, I really started to get into a different mindset. It took time. It wasn't overnight, but I realized that it wasn't my fault if I was doing my best, if I was being aware or I had insight into how I was being with other people, if I was caring about how I showed up, if I was caring about how I was perceived, and if I really knew the people I was talking about, but they still didn't like the fact that I was going to gently nudge them towards being a better team. I was going to gently nudge them towards better performance, and I was going to do my job as a supervisor and check in on things. Ultimately, that wasn't my fault. Ultimately, it wasn't my task to worry about that. And so there was a transition there where I decided I'm going to focus on what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to do it in a way that's most palatable for anybody on this project site, but I'm going to continue to do that, and I'm not going to stress, and I'm not going to worry about it and have a feeling of less self-importance, less self-worth, and be depressed about these things. And it was because of this book, reading the book, The Courage to be Disliked. And I would offer this book to any of you who have the same issues as I did, or that I continue to work through and try to suppress, because it's fantastic. And so it has been a game changer for me. And the reason I think that this is important, and the reason I'm putting this into a podcast, is because mental health has been a major issue lately. How often is mental health attributed, or actually not even just attributed, but actually the root cause of why somebody might be depressed, or why somebody might have anxiety, or why somebody, and I mean this respectfully and reverently, I don't mean this disrespectfully, or I mean, how often has mental health or somebody else's bullying or somebody else negatively affecting somebody been the cause of somebody committing suicide or hurting themselves or making drastic life decisions which alter the rest of their lives, when it could have been done differently, or we could have headed in a different direction because people were more properly focused on what God thought about them or what they thought about themselves. And that's why I think the topic is so important today. So I've spent quite a bit of time. This might be a little bit of a longer podcast, but I've done quite a bit of research here to put this content together to help any of us that might have this issue. You know, I read a book one time that was called Smart Love, and this was a parenting book that Katie and I read a long time ago when we were first parents. You know, I was like most parents, didn't want to take advice from others, so I'm reading books about this stuff. And in that book, and I really appreciated it, it said, when you're raising children, how you treat them will be a part of how they view themselves in the future, unless they obviously choose to self-improve and make life decisions later on that will change their course. And what they said was that people either have primary or secondary happiness. And primary happiness is, what does God think of me? What is my inherent self-worth? What do I think of myself? And then he said children are raised also with what's called secondary happiness. And secondary happiness is, do I have the right circumstance? Do I have a nice house? Do I have people that like me? Am I being treated well? Do other people feel like I'm doing well? Do my parents think highly of me? All of these circumstantial type things that we really can't control, they call secondary happiness. And when you look at it like that, and when we as human beings think about, am I unhappy in this moment? I've always been able to look back and say, is this affecting my primary happiness or my secondary happiness? My primary happiness is I'm still worthwhile in God's eyes, and I still love myself. So why am I so unhappy? And the reason is because I'm letting secondary happiness type issues affect me. Meaning, am I having trouble with paying my bills? Does somebody not like me? Am I in a fight with somebody? These things are affecting me negatively because I'm so caught up in the moment. I'm so caught up with my interactions with other people that are secondary type things that it's negatively affecting me. And so I really always appreciated that. And then in the book, The Courage to be Disliked, they talk about Adlerian psychology. And I'm going to go over some of these concepts with you today, but I would really encourage you to read this book if you have any trouble with things like this. Now, I have my outline here that I'm talking from, and down at the bottom, I was going to cover this section, but I'm going to switch this up just a little bit and talk about this first. So, and then I'll come back to it in just a minute. So, I get to do a lot of personality types. So I'll put together player cards for people, which uses the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the MBTI, and I use that type indicator in addition to some questions that I ask people to find out what their personality is, what are their tendencies, what are their preferences. And I'll go through those results and help people be more aware of their natural tendencies and how they interact with other people. And I've done hundreds and hundreds of these, literally. I do them for every boot camp, any interaction, any mastermind I'm doing, anybody I'm consulting with. And so I started to see patterns in people. And there are a group of people in these type indicators that really want positive praise. They really want positive feedback. And so I'll give you an example. I am an ENFJ. Mine is extroverted, intuitive, feeling, and judging personality. So I'm a very emotional, outgoing, kind of in my head, theory. What are the possibilities kind of a person, but I make decisions quickly. I'm very judgmental in that way. And so if you look at my strengths and weaknesses, it'll say tolerant, reliable, charismatic, altruistic, natural leaders. Under weaknesses, it says overly idealistic, too selfless, too sensitive, fluctuating self-esteem, and struggles to make tough decisions. Now, when you go through those three center items, too selfless, it says this personality type can bury themselves in their hopeful promises, feeling others' problems as their own and striving hard to meet their word. So that's focusing too much on secondary happiness, on what other people think. Let's go over to the too sensitive part. While receptive to criticism, seeing it as a tool for leading a better team, it's easy for this personality type to take it a little too much to heart. Their sensitivity to others means that this personality type sometimes feel problems that aren't their own and try to fix things they can't fix, worrying if they are doing enough. So those two things, in addition to that third one, which is fluctuating self-esteem based on what other people think, those can be very harmful to somebody's mental health. And so while these are natural tendencies, these are natural weaknesses, we need to strive to neutralize these things through proper thoughts, beliefs, practices, and habits, and daily routines so that we can be more effective. And so I just wanted to say that certain personality types struggle with this more than others. And in fact, I love going on to a construction project, doing these player cards, and then having this gruff superintendent say, oh, I don't need praise, I don't need positive affirmation. And then halfway through the meeting or whatever we're doing, the coaching session, the consulting session, the team building session, it really comes out that that is something that they need, that they're not getting, that is causing them stress, or they haven't been taught to not need it or to get around it with some of these concepts. And so we really can't ignore that. And if you've ever had the opportunity to do the Myers-Briggs type indicator, that's fantastic. If you haven't, you can go on to 16personalities.com, take a free test, or you can do the paid version through Myers-Briggs. It's absolutely fantastic. So let's go over a couple of concepts here. A lot of who we are is shaped from the past, but we can change. Our condition is not fixed. Reasons for the condition can be changed, and we are free to transform as needed. But like I said, if we think about how we grew up, how our parents treated us, how other people treated us, the level of happiness that we receive is mostly, and I don't want to say fixed, but guided and headed in our direction in life by how we were treated as we were treated when we were younger. And so what I mean by that, if you're used to a certain level of happiness or a certain level of treatment from your parents, typically that's what you're going to expect throughout the rest of your life. That's why people who were abused as children will end up being in abusive situations when they're older, because that's what they're used to. That's their set point. They're used to it. Human beings are programmed to think that how they were treated by their parents is how it should be, whether their parents were perfect or not, or somewhere in between. Obviously, no parents are perfect, but however people are treated is what they become accustomed to. And if any of you listening to this podcast, if you've ever felt a moment where you're like, everything's going good in my life, I don't know why I'm so sad right now, that's usually because you're not used to those levels of happiness. Your mind isn't programmed to do it. And so you have to find ways to break out of those set points. And I use things like Tony Robbins, Rapport Leadership International, which really pushes me out of my comfort zone, pushes me out of those set points. And I need to do something like that every year to program myself to higher levels of happiness, because I'm used to a lower level, a lower set point of happiness because of how I was treated by other people when I was younger. But the point here is that people become comfortable with what they know, but they can change if they're willing to have some discomfort. And so I'm not being disrespectful towards people who have been abused or criticized or mistreated when they were younger, but being used to something is usually more comfortable than changing, even if being used to abusive treatment is the more familiar thing when you could break out to higher levels of happiness. And so just realize that it's going to take a lot of work for all of us to change, to get out of our norms. We determine our own lives according to the meaning we give those past experiences. We do not suffer from the shock of our experiences. We instead make out of them whatever suits our purposes. So the usual way is, okay, here's an example. John was traumatized as a child, so he shut himself in and doesn't go outside. But the Adlerian way of dealing with this would be, John has the goal of not going out, so he's manufacturing a state of anxiety and fear to achieve that goal. He thinks to himself, if I stay in my room all the time, my parents will be worried about me. I'll get their attention. So the point here isn't to insult people who think they have issues. It's to say, can we look at situations and look at really what's going on? It's either going to come from our past experiences, the situations that we find ourselves, or the meaning that we give to those past experiences, and we need to know both in order to get past either of them. So let's go into another concept here. We tend to hate ourselves based on what we think are our faults. People who retreat into themselves often do so because they don't want to be hurt by others. The irony is that by distancing themselves, they often come across as aloof and arrogant. But it doesn't have to be that way. You have to accept that pain and exclusion are as much a part of life as joy and inclusion. Those that choose to retreat as some sort of tactic will solve nothing. They've created the wrong solution for a problem that they have ultimately misidentified. And so let me go back to that original statement that we tend to hate ourselves based on what we think are our faults. Well, we can either say, these are our faults and I'm going to have low self-esteem, or we can say, hey, pain and exclusion and faults are a way of life. How can I leverage my strengths, not care what other people think, and how can I love myself for my strengths? And so that's something that we tend to do. And Adlerian psychology will say we need to learn to be ourselves. We need to love ourselves for who we are, and we need to not focus on our weaknesses. So take, for example, I want to be liked. I care what people think. Being myself gets pushback. That then affects my secondary happiness. And so I stop performing and get blocks to my leadership. That's what typically happens to us. So we think of this image of what we think others want us to be, or what we have now thought that we want ourselves to be. We start to care about that too much. We are not good enough. We're not measuring up to those standards. That affects our happiness, gets us into a depressed state. That hurts us, and then we retreat from other human interactions, which will help us in life to be successful. And that's the pattern, and it shouldn't be like that. And so we need to find a way, and that's what this book does, is to properly identify our strengths, realize that weaknesses and pain and exclusion are sometimes a part of life. It shouldn't matter what other people think. And so we don't get ourselves hurt, and we don't pull back, and we don't retain. And so we don't get any of these blocks to leadership. And let me remind you, and I'll go through these quickly, what some of the blocks to leadership are that will hold us back in our careers, in our life, in our positions of leadership. 1, wanting to be liked. That ties right in. 2, being closed-minded. 3, playing savior with people. That ties right in. 4, fear of risking. That ties right into what we're talking about today. 5, indecisiveness. 6, low expectations of others. 7, being too critical. 8, being controlling versus empowering. 9, low self-worth. That's right on point. 10, low self-esteem. Right on point. Number 11, focusing too much on problems. 12, having a lack of purpose. 13, having a fear of embarrassment. That right there is right on point with what we're talking about. 14, fear of rejection. 15, having to be perfect. 16, having to work hard. I just want you to see that although we've covered blocks to leadership in another podcast, that 75% of the blocks to your leadership come from this issue of caring too much of what other people think. For instance, it's fairly common to worry about appearances. We might be concerned what others see when they look at us. Sometimes even just walking down the street is enough to trigger thoughts that people are silently judging us. Of course, most of the time that's just nonsense. People just don't care about how others look at all, and they probably don't even notice that thing. Let me tell you a quick story. Once a man who had been slandered by a newspaper came to Edward Everett asking what to do about it. Said Everett, "Do nothing. Half the people who bought the paper never saw the article. Half of those who saw it did not read it. Half of those who read it did not understand it. Half of those who understood it did not believe it. Half of those who believed it are of no account anyway." And that's from The Sunny Side of the Street, November 1989. See also Zig Ziglar, Staying Up, Up, Up in a Down, Down, Down World 2000, page 174. So the bottom line is, we really have to get out of worrying about what people think, and that will guide us in proper directions. But if we go into a bad direction, that will take us into a place where we will develop blocks to leadership. So let's go on to the next topic, which I'm excited to talk to you about. When we get angry or yell, we are trying to control and manipulate someone else. And when somebody is getting angry or yelling at you, they are trying to control and manipulate you. Let's take some examples. The waiter spilled coffee on your jacket, so you yelled at him. If you really can't control your emotions in anger, would stabbing him by a knife be okay? What really happened is that you fabricated anger and shouted to make him submit to you. You might be familiar with this. A mother is angrily yelling at her daughter. The phone rings, so she picks it up and changes her tone and becomes very polite. Then when she hangs up, she goes back to yelling again. We fabricate emotions to reach our goals. A student complains that she has a fear of blushing. She turns red whenever she's in public. She has feelings for someone but can't confess because she has this fear. In reality, she fears rejection, so she fabricated that fear of blushing as an excuse to not confess her feelings. She can live in the possibility that, if only I didn't have that fear of blushing, I could have. And then that would take her to newer levels of happiness. So the solution is to accept yourself now, and regardless of the outcome, have the courage to step forward and stop fabricating excuses. Now, here's another point that is key to that. Deny the desire for recognition. And this is going to be really difficult for people like me and for people like you if you're anything like me or you have one of those type indicators. Wishing so hard to be recognized will lead to a life of following expectations held by other people who want you to be this kind of person, quote unquote. You throw away who you really are and live other people's lives. Therefore, you should deny your desire for recognition. You're not living to satisfy other people's expectations, and other people aren't living to satisfy your expectations. And then going back to that anger piece, there's no need to manipulate each other with anger and with yelling, if that's true, and it is. The cost of freedom in relationships is that one can be disliked by other people. It is proof that you are free and a sign that you're living in accordance with your own principles, your own primary happiness, and according to the way God wants you to live. Unless you're unconcerned by other people's judgments and have no fear of being disliked by other people, and pay the cost that you might never be recognized, you will never follow through in your own way of living. You won't ever be free. There may be a person who doesn't think well of you, but that's not your task. All you can do with regard to your own life is to choose the best path that you believe in. So how do people judge that? That's the task of other people, and it's not the matter you can do anything about. So here's a concept that you're absolutely going to love. The key is to live our lives. I like the concept of tasks. When somebody else does not like us, that is their task. How we respond and love ourselves is our task. We can control our task. We cannot control somebody else's task. And so that was the point of the book where things really started to change for me, because I need to love myself. That's the task that I need to be worrying about. But how often do we worry and focus so much on what other people think? Well, we can't control what other people think. That's their task. So I need to focus on what God and what I think of myself. That's my task. And so that's when I really started to understand these things. And thank God that I read this book, because now that I'm doing podcasts and now that I'm doing Facebook posts and LinkedIn videos and stuff like that, it's really easy to start to get addicted to likes and what other people think. And so I put out a post, or I used to, and I'd be like, oh, this isn't getting very many comments. This isn't getting very many likes, or we only got such and such podcast downloads today. Am I doing a good enough job? Am I worthy? And I had to switch from the human needs of certainty and significance to, hey, Jason, wait a minute. I'm doing this podcast to bless people's lives. I'm doing this podcast to help people grow. I'm doing this podcast to provide and give and serve and love other people. So whether or not people accept that, however many likes I get, however many comments I get, however many downloads on my podcast I get, are irrelevant. That doesn't have any bearing on who I am and what I'm doing. While I appreciate the people are using this content, that is somebody else's task. So this is what we need to focus on. Discard other people's tasks. That's so important. I'm going to say it again. Discard other people's tasks. we need to think with the perspective of whose task is this in any emotional or interpersonal situation, and separate our tasks from other people's tasks. This is called separation of tasks. You shouldn't worry about or intrude on other people's tasks. For example, studying at school is a child's task, not the parent. The task owner is the one who will ultimately receive the result brought out by the choice. Parents use the phrase, "it's for your own good," when in reality they're doing so in order to fulfill their own goals, like their appearance in the eyes of society and their desire for control. Parents should be interested in knowing what the child is doing and letting the child know that they're ready to assist in studying whenever needed, but they shouldn't intrude on the child's task. Discarding other people's tasks is the first step towards lightening the load and making life simpler. And I think this is super funny because Katie and I homeschool our children. We've always done so because we wanted that more open, freer, entrepreneurial lifestyle for our children. And knowing that homeschool kids are just as social as anybody else, we decided to go down that road. We also felt it was inspired. But Katie was talking to me about how some of the kids were arguing and that it was really a burden. It was a stress on her. And so this concept is fantastic because we started homeschooling in the first place to have a more flexible schedule. So why are we now focusing on trying to push when there's really no need? That's somebody else's task. And so this concept shows up everywhere in life. And so we have to realize that we hold the cards for our interpersonal relationships. Many people think that relationship cards are held by the other person, and they're not. That's why people wonder, how does this person feel about me? And then we end up living in a way that satisfies the wishes of other people and dissatisfies ourselves. So if you're tied to the desire for recognition, all the cards will stay in the hands of other people. If you can grasp the separation of tasks, you'll notice that you hold all the cards and you can control that. Why would we give our feeling of self-worth to other people? Because now they control that situation and we're in a hopeless situation. So we really need to build horizontal relationships, which means that we don't really condemn or praise people. We state the facts. So when you praise, you're unconsciously creating a hierarchical relationship and seeing the other person as beneath you, as if you're passing a judgment from one person of ability to another person of no ability. You can convey words of gratitude instead. State the facts, saying thank you to this partner who has helped you with your work. This was a big help. If receiving praise is what you're after, you'll have no choice but to adapt to that person's yardstick and put your brakes on your own freedom. Thank you, on the other hand, is a clear expression of gratitude. So I think we need to get better at stating the facts instead of emotionally tying somebody to something so that they feel obligated to take care of you. And that's how a lot of bosses actually play savior with people, and it's really unhealthy. And I need to stop doing that in my own life because I like to give positive affirmations and praise, but sometimes I do it in an unhealthy way, and I need to get out of that habit, and I will. So up until now, that's been a problem. And so going back to those personality profiles, those personality types, be careful because some of you will naturally want to be accepted by other people. It will naturally want to accept other people. Do it in a healthier way so that you can separate your tasks. And so the real key to all of this is having a feeling of community. The goal of interpersonal relationships isn't how can I manipulate things one-on-one, but how can I give to the community? And so Tony Robbins says the 6 human needs are certainty, variety, significance, connection, growth, and contribution. And most of us focus somewhere in the first 4, certainty, variety, significance, connection, when if we changed our focus from certainty and significance to growth and contribution, we would have different motivations for doing things and we would be ultimately happier. So take, for example, me doing this podcast. So I've been getting a little bit stressed this last month because I want to know that we're making progress. I want to know that we're, on the verge of making money with clients. I want to know that we're doing good for people. So I'm looking at likes, like I said, I'm looking at, how many comments are made, how many downloads do I get? And Katie was like, you're kind of psycho right now. Like you're stressed out. You're getting a little bit too tired. You're going at a grueling pace. What is your problem? And I realized, and Tony always leads us through these things, I was too focused on certainty. Am I going to make enough money in this business to take care of our needs? And significance. Am I significant and doing a good job in the eyes of everybody else? But that's not why I started doing a business and doing a podcast. I was inspired to do so for personal growth and contribution to other people. And so once I realized that and switch it back, I put those two notes on my phone background, growth, contribution, and I'm reminded of that now to say, hey, when I'm doing podcasts, when I'm publishing content, when I'm serving clients in a business, when I'm doing coaching, I should be having fun. This is fun. This is my life calling. I don't need to make it stressful. So the focus on how do we become more happy is getting a feeling of community and getting a feeling of growth, getting a feeling of contribution, because once we start giving as our main purpose, it doesn't matter how people respond. Once we feel like we're adding to the community, it doesn't matter if people like us. Once we focus on our calling from God, it doesn't matter how well we're doing as long as we're giving our best. And so when I can feel I am beneficial to the community, to my peers, then I can have a true sense of my self-worth, the feeling that I am of use to somebody else. Happiness is a feeling of contribution. And in order to do that, we have to have self-acceptance, confidence in others, and contribution to others. So self-acceptance. The goal is to accept yourself 60% and think, how should I go about getting closer to 100%? You cannot change what you're born with, but what you do with this equipment is your own power. Focus on what you can change. Confidence in others. This is where I've struggled in the past. When you switch from attachment to self to concern for others, confidence in others becomes absolutely essential. Unconditional confidence is the foundation of any deep relationship. And then contribution. The most easily understood contribution to others is work. It is through labor that one makes contribution to others and commits to one's community. One can feel I am of use to someone and come to accept one's existential worth. This helps accepting ourselves again, and you can see that in a circular loop. It will always work for you. So have the courage to be normal, be yourself, and enjoy the journey. So the key to all of this for me, the summary for all of this for me, is that we have to focus on our tasks. We can't worry about what other people think, and we have to contribute by getting past our blocks to leadership. I've gone through that 16, and truly being ourselves and focus on giving in life, and then we can live a remarkable life. I would highly encourage you, please, to go download this book on Audible if you have any of the issues that I'm talking about here. And let me close again with this quote. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And that's by Theodore Roosevelt. The bottom line is, we're going to have to get past what other people think if we're ever going to give 100%, get out of our comfort zone, and start serving humanity. So the challenge is, realize your past does not shape your future. Stop caring about what people think. They don't pay much attention anyway. Stop using your emotions to control people. Stop seeking and giving recognition. Discard other people's tasks and have the courage to be you and give. So the closing for this is that we can all break into new levels of leadership, that we can have the courage to be disliked, and that we can live a remarkable life where we're not depressed, we're not sad, we're not worried, we're not like kicked in the gut when somebody gives us some negative feedback, and ultimately where people don't feel like they have to numb life with drinking or with medications or with drugs or with television or even committing suicide, where people can live a whole and happy life, a beautiful existence. So until we meet again, I really hope that you can find a voice for progress and growth and for being yourself, because there's only one of you. And I know that sounds like a cat poster, but I'm serious. There's only one of you, and we need you. Nobody's better off without you. And your contributions are crucial, and you are wanted and loved, even if there are people out there that will dislike your videos, dislike your podcast, and not share and comment. And that's metaphorical, obviously. Don't worry about the likes, like Gary Vee says. Give, focus on giving, and be kind. And that's what we're out here to do. So until we meet again, I hope you find your center and you realize that you are infinitely loved by God and that you should love yourself and you have that primary happiness. On we go.
Please join us next time in elevating the entire construction experience for workers, leaders, and companies coast to coast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to share with your construction colleagues and help us spread the word by rating, subscribing, and leaving a review on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate it. We'll catch you next time on the Elevate Construction Podcast.